start. Okay. Yeah, I can see people joining in now. Okay, just a few seconds and we will start. Okay, I think we can start. So, right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from whichever part of the world that you're joining from. My name is Manish Shanbhag. I'm with EIPM, and I'll be the facilitator today for this webinar on value thinking in procurement. Okay, what I'm going to do is just give you some quick information on some of the logistics part before. I have a colleague of mine, Silmara, who is on mute, but she's there. And for any questions or queries that you might have during the webinar and even after, you can, you can drop your messages in the chat section, and she will get back to you immediately. She's very, very quick in getting back to you if you have any technical issues or something like that. So, okay, so just some quick logistics issues. So use the chat to ask any questions at any point of time. Whenever there is a logical conclusion on certain topic, I can take that question, or we take that towards the end of the webinar. Okay. You'll also receive a link for the video replay of the session. Okay, and you'll receive a copy of the presentation in the end, which will include also the survey results. And we're going to do a couple of poll questions within this webinar that you will receive at the end of the webinar as well. Okay, so this is just some quick information about logistics. At the end also, there is a small kind of feedback survey. So take you a minute, maybe less than few seconds. That's it. To get for us to get a feedback and improve for the next sessions. Okay. Right. So coming back, we have quite a few people. Just to let you know the kind of audience that we are having, I'm just looking at the list of people. So we have largely people from Europe in the morning session. There are a few from Asia as well, as I can see in the list. But largely it's France, Germany, Poland, some people from Saudi Arabia as well, I can see registering, and so on. So we have quite a few, let's say a wide audience, and across industries. I can see a lot of domains also across various kinds of industries, from manufacturing, heavy manufacturing, services as well, consulting included, all that. So we have a variety of people who have been registered and who are right now online. Okay. All right, let's start on. So what we're going to do today in the next 45 to 50 minutes, and then I will open up the floor for questions, is we're going to talk about value thinking in procurement. Okay, just a quick history, let's say, on how procurement has evolved. So the idea is, if you look at 50 years ago, even procurement, and even today in a lot of companies, a lot of clients that we work with, I still see procurement being pursued as, let's say, placing a PO, yeah, different levels. So, and this was existing 50 years ago as well. So placing a PO, following up the PO. So it's that perception of procurement that you have, to the other extreme in some companies where it is an integral part of an ecosystem that is driving growth, and that is driving innovation. Okay, so there are these two extremes of the perception and the value add of procurement. What we're going to see is how we can move towards the ecosystem mode, okay, from a purely transactional kind of a support function to a fully contributing function to the ecosystem. Okay, and then there are various elements within these and various steps within these two extremes that we can see, and each step, how can procurement add value. Okay, this is what we are going to look at. So keeping this in mind, I'm just going to open up the first survey. Okay, just give me a second. And in the survey, the idea is this is going to ask you like one question with some choices. You can see that there may not be a right or wrong. You know, it's any choice is okay, but it's just to get a feedback on what you feel, okay, about this. So I'm going to open up the survey. Please vote for your choice, and don't forget to save. Okay, don't forget to save the choice. Okay, so I'm just opening up the survey, the question, and then you can see the. So what, according to you, is the definition of value? Yeah, think about the different choices. Click your answers. Don't forget to save as well. Okay, don't forget to submit. I mean, there's a bottom at the there's a button at the end to save, submit, and I can get the answers. Okay, you have multiple choices also. There could be more than one right answers. Okay, so I'm getting in the answers. I will give a minute for everybody. So I'm just going to read out quickly. What, according to you, is the definition of value created by procurement? Provide the service at the cheapest price, best quality, best satisfaction at lowest cost, risk protection from external supply chain, stable relationship with all suppliers and internal clients. Okay, I can see the graphs changing. Okay, good. We have some responses. This is multiple choice, yeah. So you can choose one, two more. Okay, a few seconds more. Let's say last 20 seconds. Ten seconds. Don't forget to submit so that I get your responses registered. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to close the voting now. Thank you very much. And we will see the results now. Okay. So you can see on the screen the results that you have voted for. Okay, so as you could see that there's a certain element of value creation that procurement does for each of these choices. Okay, there's no right and wrong answer. So yes, procurement is expected to provide the cheapest price, but you rightly said that's not the objective. You can see here the most choices went in for quality, best satisfaction at lowest cost, and risk protection from external supply chain. Of course, you have stable relationships with your suppliers and internal clients. Then also the cheapest price, which I'm glad to see that there's lesser answers there, because that was a view that would be existing with procurement for like maybe 30 years ago. Okay, well, procurement has moved beyond just the cheapest price provider, let's say. Okay, so that's great to see. And as you can see, there's no right and wrong answer, I said, but I'm glad that the 2 or 3 most important ones about quality, satisfaction at lowest cost, and risk protection from external supply chain have received the highest answer. So we're moving towards the right direction. Okay, I'm going to go back to the presentation. Okay, hold on. All right, and what we're going to discuss now is the agenda that we'll see is what is value. Yeah, so we'll just define, broadly speaking, what is the value, and especially related to procurement. How can procurement add value? Some of the contributions that procurement can do, and the impact that it has. And this impact, we are going to see a direct impact on the financials of the company. Okay. Then some examples of upstream and downstream contributions of procurement. Some of the non-financial value add also that procurement is giving, like a lot of the times, as you answered, their risk, right? Many of the companies that I've worked with, it's not quantified. Risk is not monetized or dollarized or euroized, whichever way you call it, yet, right? So largely, it could be considered as a non-financial value add as of today. More and more companies are monetizing it, so which is a good thing. But some examples like this of non-financial value add, and then finally we'll just go through a summary of what we just discussed. Okay. So as you've seen, in terms of purely value definition, we come up with this value equation. Okay. And one of the answers that you chose is certainly right, where we have the best satisfaction at the lowest cost. So when we talk about value, it's a function of satisfaction as against cost. Okay, so when we talk about quality, when we talk about risk protection, when we talk about even cheapest price relationship, all that is combined into some kind of a satisfaction that the customer gets, internal customer as well as the external customer, versus the cost that is behind to give these kind of satisfactions. Okay, so ultimately there are, purely mathematically speaking, technically, if you look at a value as satisfaction divided by cost, there are purely two ways in which you can add value. You can create or increase value, right? One is increase the numerator, and two is decrease the denominator. Yeah, and in whichever way you keep the numerator here, I'm just going to quickly mark that. You can keep the numerator as constant here, fair enough, and decrease the cost. This is where procurement has been since many, many years. Savings, cost, reduce cost, savings. So when you do that, you're increasing your value. Okay, and this is clearly even today, procurement is judged or perceived largely through reduction in the denominator of money or cost, which increases the value. The other way to do it is also to increase the numerator, satisfaction. What are the different ways in which I can satisfy my stakeholder? Yeah, keeping the cost constant. Yeah, the best thing to do, and you'll be a star if you do that, is increase the numerator and decrease the denominator at the same time. Challenging, but many companies are still doing it. So how do you do that? I mean, we won't get into details of that, but the idea is to give you some ideas of how the value addition can happen on both sides in parallel. Okay. Then, of course, there are other elements where you can still increase cost, but if you have a larger increase in the satisfaction, you still create value. So it's not necessary that the costs have to go down all the time, but even if there's a tiny increase in the cost, a significant increase in satisfaction will give that higher value anyway. Okay, so as procurement, I call these as procurement rights, so to say, where we have procurement. What is procurement typically expected to do? It's expected to have the right product or service, whichever is requested, at the right place, at the right price, yeah, at the right time, quality, quantity, largely speaking. Okay, these are typically the rights. There are other elements also, but the crux, let's say, of procurement expectation from your stakeholders is largely on these few elements. Okay, and we will see how these elements now contribute. What is the actions that you do here across these different elements contribute to the bottom line of the company. When we talk about bottom line, obviously we talk about the income statement or the profit or loss statement, where you have the bottom line, which is the net income. So this is an example, a very, very, very basic example of an income statement. There are not many details, so don't get too involved in this, but very basic chunks of all the key elements in an income statement. Okay, so you have the bottom line, right? If we just track back, if we just do bottom to top, okay, let's just move from bottom to top. There's income tax. Can you do something about it? Not too much, because it depends on where your company is registered, the geography, and so on. There's a country structure for the income tax. Okay, so as procurement, you can't do too much of a contribution there. Yeah, let's say, if not very, very minimal. Okay, then we talk about the financial income and expenses of the companies. Right, so this is largely depending on how the company is structured financially, how much of debt, how much of equity, etc., what are the interest rates that they pay, and so on and so forth. Okay, so here also there's not too much that procurement can do. Where procurement is adding value is largely in the cost of sales or cost of goods sold, where you have a big contribution from all the direct procurement. Okay, so directly, that's something that goes into production, or something that is a direct labor for a service, and so on and so forth. Okay, and then you have the other element of contribution where you have indirect, yeah, where you're talking about OPEX, you're talking about reducing the operating expenses. Let's say you have plans to cut some travel plans or travel benefits. Okay, and you can see that in many companies, which companies do that, reducing travel, reducing facility costs in facility management, IT infrastructure, doing it in another way, and reducing expenses, and so on. So you can see that largely procurement is contributing to the operating income, or EBIT, yeah, earnings before income tax and interest and taxes. Okay, so the gross margin and the operating income is where procurement has a direct impact. So all these actions that you do, if I just go back, all the actions that you do here, where you're reducing your costs, yeah, in whichever way, are directly having an impact on your EBIT, yeah, or your operating income. Now, let's think beyond that. How can procurement contribute to sales? Let's say, how can it be a revenue enabler? Yeah, and this is what I mentioned before in the beginning, that procurement has had a transformation from being a purely transactional function, placing a PO, following up, treating invoices, getting payments done, etc., up till a revenue enabler. And over a period of time, it has evolved, yeah, from this PO approach to then it evolved as a function which is delivering savings. Yeah, even today, largely procurement is judged on savings, as I said. Then it moved on to being a partner of the business. Now it has moved on to boardrooms. So CPOs and or vice presidents of sourcing are sitting in the boardrooms discussing strategies with the other stakeholders, and then moving on as a direct contributor in setting up the ecosystem, innovation, and so on. So all this is moving towards how can procurement be a sales contributor as well. Okay, so given these elements of where procurement is contributing, we'll see roughly what are the key elements where key areas where procurement is contributing. Okay, so here is on the screen, you can see a typical a graph of a project timeline. Okay, I've just taken one example. So here on the x-axis, you can see time, okay, of a, let's say, a project. It could be a project, serialized production, etc., where you have in the beginning design, needs definition, yeah, getting information from stakeholders, designing the concept, defining the product, designing the product, and so on. Then there's a setup phase, and then it moves beyond to the serialized production, let's say, or execution, right? So let's just first look at the blue dotted line here, which talks about the costs generated by decision. So, okay, and as you can see, largely the upstream part, right, in the beginning, right, is generating most of the costs. Okay, whatever decision you take, this is generating most of the costs in the upstream, and then they flatten out later on. Okay, so whatever technology you select, whatever kind of material you select, all these decisions which are gone into the designing or defining the need itself is producing a lot of the costs. Okay, and on the other hand, if you look at the orange solid line here, which is increase of expenses, they actually start increasing when you are into production. Okay, so there's obviously you'll spend some time and some effort and money in prototypes and reiterations of the product or the whatever you're developing, but the actual increase in costs happen later on. Okay, now the most important part, and this is the the purple solid line, which is the potential savings. Yeah, as we said before, savings is a big contributor in the denominator of value add. So if you look at the potential savings that can be done, you can see largely that the contribution is coming from the upstream, yeah, which is clear. So if you have some action plans, if you do some kind of a value add in the upstream of the project, it is contributing to much larger savings, and they dip exponentially. Yeah, they dip exponentially as you start moving towards the execution phase or the downstream phase of the project, right? So if you look at very classical procurement levers that we use, one of the most classical procurement lever we use is negotiation, right? And procurement is judged, procurement performance is judged largely in negotiations. Negotiations is typically coming around this range, yeah. When I'm talking about external negotiations where you're negotiating with suppliers, where a lot of things might be already decided by the business, and procurement is working mostly on price. Today, you might get 5% reduction from your suppliers, tomorrow 2%, 1%, and so on and so forth. This is a limit. Yeah, there's a limit. So in very, very crude terms, you might say that you're fighting for peanuts. Okay, this is just a crude term I'm talking about. But the main contribution is coming where you see that a large part of biggest, let's say the biggest potential savings is coming from upstream when your actions are involved in the upstream. So some examples, and we'll go through these examples a bit more in detail. We'll take two examples largely and explore them. But you can see some examples here already mentioned in the upstream: identifying the right need, adjusting the need to supply market. A lot of the time, the businesses come to you and say, okay, I need this, etc., etc., etc. As procurement, where you are on the frontier of the external world, you are like a link between the external world of the suppliers and the internal stakeholders, right? When you're at this frontier, what can you do to adjust the need itself? Because you have a lot of information coming in from the supplier base that maybe not all people internally have. So you are at a very critical position to give that information and maybe adjust the need to something which is standard available in the supply market, right? Managing risk, as you rightly chose in those value add, managing risk, again, it is upstream. Yeah, downstream actions are, of course, you have some mitigation plans and so on, but largely when you're deciding on what kind of a supplier that you want to go, what kind of a strategy you want to put in place, you manage risk upstream itself, providing the economic impact and so on. Okay, so you can see we'll go through a couple of examples in a bit. Whereas downstream, it is very classical levers, like you have your cost breakdown, negotiation, as I said, some of the TCO starts moving towards the left, but still largely considered a large part in cost reduction. So you have moving towards the upstream. So you have all these levers like negotiation, if you do RFQ, etc., cost breakdown, and so on and so forth, which are more towards the downstream levers. Okay, so the top two boxes, as you can see, one is cost avoidance here, and one is cost reduction. So you can see largely a cost avoidance when you're working on upstream. It is mostly cost avoidance, and then you have cost reduction, which is largely the performance that today is just on procurement. I've seen many companies, they don't even track cost avoidance. Okay, fortunately or unfortunately, whichever way you call it, but many of the procurement actions and savings can be actually got in the cost avoidance phase, but unfortunately today that is not tracked by many companies, so you lose that kind of value as well. Yeah, but eventually this is what we are going to do now, eventually, to see how can we convince our stakeholders to consider the cost avoidance as well as a part of the value thinking that you do in procurement. Okay, so we'll take two examples here, okay, concretely. One is sorry, we'll just go. This is again the list. This is again the list of the upstream and downstream contributions, a bit more in detail. So you have stakeholder expectations, or early engagement, as we call. We'll take this example of functional specifications. yeah, which is a very key element or a key lever to understand and for the contribution towards value thinking. Challenging it helps you challenge the product and service features. Then you have value engineering, obviously, which is one of these tools which is done upstream to add, to add more, let's say, to adjust the product features, again, product features, challenge the products, etc., or the service, adjust the need to the market. We saw that outside in view of innovation. I told you about getting innovation from suppliers. And in fact, large part, many of the companies today, when they are talking about getting innovation from suppliers, which is also acts as a revenue enabler. Yeah? I talked about contributing towards sales. So good product, good model, let's say business model with the suppliers, all that can act as a revenue enabler for your company. Monetizing risk, this is what we talked about. We identified risks. Many of the companies today are monetizing the risk. So when you talk about risk, typically I've seen with many of the companies, this is the risk, this is the mitigation plan. All right, fantastic. So what do I do with it? That is the question that comes up. But when you are talking about monetizing the risk, we are talking about for each of these elements, how much dollar value or euro value or whichever, in terms of money, how much money is at stake. Once you do that, the stakeholders start to listen. Yeah, once you do that, because there's finance involved in it. Yeah, and then gives you a concrete, let's say, more tangible kind of a risk mitigation plan that can be done. And once you do, if you do a mitigation plan, how is that financial impact reduced? This is again done upstream as well. Then there are some technical tools, redesign to cost, should costing, DFX, design to TCO, design for assembly, and so on, which are all on the upstream. And then the downstream part, certainly, as you can see, these are some of the other, I've listed down all these elements other than savings, okay? Because savings, I assume this is a standard KPI all over the world for all procurement functions, okay? Savings. So I'm not talking about savings here largely. Okay, so what are the other value adds that you can do as procurement? Yeah, reduce time in selection of suppliers. Very purely speaking, we saw a couple of examples before. One of my colleagues was working with this in terms of reduction in time of an RFQ process. Very simply put, the RFQ took around 6 months to 8 months before, from the time conceptualization was done till the time a supplier was selected, and that time through an agile process, which is linked below, through an agile process was reduced to a month, 4 weeks, okay, 4 to 6 weeks. So you can see that time that you gain could help you in time to market, could help you move ahead of the competition. If there is a first mover's advantage for that product or service, you get an advantage and so on. So these are all these value adds that procurement can do massively to contribute to either a revenue enabler or being get a larger savings. Which can be done downstream as well. Yeah, being agile, then cutting red tape in approvals, which is again processing your POs faster, making sure your invoices and POs are tracked well, and and so on and so forth. Negotiating payment terms. Obviously, this is a part of a typical negotiation contract that you do, but showing how it's going to impact your cash flow is also very critical. Reducing transaction costs. So again, negotiating with suppliers to have lesser number of invoices, maybe how you can automatize them, and so on and so forth. Okay, deploying contracts efficiently is one of the key things that you could do as procurement. Yeah, because procurement job is not done when the contract is signed. If you have a fantastic contract in place, yeah, but it's not deployed efficiently, then you lose that value. Okay. Imagine you have a contract in place, but still people buying locally, they are doing maverick buying and so on and so forth. The value that you bring in through the contract is not realized fully. Okay, so that could be a big contribution again from. So as you can see now, we move away from savings and see what are the different ways in which we could add value. Thinking the way, this is one of the crux of value thinking in procurement on how I can add value, yeah, given the basic equation that will follow on different elements and not necessarily on savings. Okay, so we start moving away from that, yeah, and we'll do that as a part of the non-financial KPIs as well, yeah. But before that, two examples. One is the functional spec. So here we talked about the upstream, right? I'm going to just share quickly one example, a bit more in detail. It's quite simple. Self-explanatory, as you can see. We have the upstream value thinking example here, where you have, let's say we talk about functional specs. We take functional specifications as a lever to value add in the upstream process. Well, here you have the customer's point of view, where the customer thinks a product has or a service has various functions, okay, of unequal importance. There could be some functions within the product or service that are very high in terms of the customer's point of view, and so on and so forth. You could rank those functions. And if you look at a manufacturer's point of view, okay, it is made of, let's say, if you look at the classical cost breakdown, you're looking at a cost hierarchy. Okay, so on the right hand side, you're looking at a cost hierarchy of components of made of material and labor. And on the left hand side, you're seeing a customer's point of view through functions. So when we start working on functional analysis, largely, we try to see why is this product done in a certain way, because it is having certain functions that satisfy a need, right? So if you look at this example here, if you have function 1, which is very, very important for the customer, and in cost hierarchy, it is ranked number 3. So it's not the most expensive function to include in the product or service that you are creating, right? If you look at these two others, okay, which are ranked very low, function 2 and function 3, in fact, they are generating the highest cost for you. Yeah. So the idea is to challenge and rethink. It's like it's kind of a mixture between functional specs and a little bit of value analysis as well. You know, what value does this function give? But we stick to functional view. So to challenge functions 2 and 3, whether it is absolutely necessary, whether it can be reduced, the tolerance levels can be reduced, some grade of materials can be reduced, you know, these kind of additions that you could do to reduce the cost of 2 and 3 effectively. So you can see, and maybe then function 6, which is very, very important to the customer, is lower. Okay, fine. If this is the case, we can stick to it. But is there something additional that we can add here that will give an increased value? Yeah, remember when we talk about the value equation, it's satisfaction by cost. So even if you increase cost a little bit, but it gives a very high satisfaction in terms of quality, risk mitigation, whichever way you want to represent it, that can also be done. So the idea here is to see what functions, just one example of functional specs. So what functions, what is the cost hierarchy, where I can add value, where I can reduce my cost hierarchy by compromising on certain functions without actually affecting the the quality, or without actually affecting the function itself. So it will still perform the same functions, but I can reduce my tolerance levels, reduce my grade, and so on and so forth, where the customer is not finding it important. Now, if you look at this, the ranking of function 2 and 3 is very, very low. Maybe it's not important to the customer at all, you know. So why spend so much? Yeah, there could be multiple reasons. Of course, you have to understand those reasons. There could be regulations, for example. Yeah, you need to have these functions because the regulation is there of the land, geography, and of the regulation of there's some regulatory body that governs this. Then it's fair enough, it's still adding value. Yeah, because without that function, your product won't sell in the market. So that is the key value. Yeah. But if there are cases where you don't find these kind of functions which are adding value but having a high cost hierarchy, that's where you could focus on. Okay, so just a quick example, and then you can break down each product, each service that you buy from a customer's point of view, from a manufacturer's point of view, and try and see where you can add value. Yeah, this is all typically what would you do upstream. Yeah, one example here. Okay, I hope you're with me so far. Okay, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate. I'm just looking at a chat function so far. It's okay. Okay, right. So then let's look at the other example here, which is some examples of downstream value thinking examples. Okay, as I said, I'm just moving other than the very classical procurement tasks of savings and so on and so forth. How could procurement add value? Okay, aside from these regular tasks. So risk mitigation, and this is I put it at the top, and you also identified it. Risk mitigation from external supply chain to secure supply, right? And this is key to secure supply, because a lot of the times you could be in situations where all you need to do is first secure supply and then move on to other areas. Yeah, but first thing is to secure supply, ensure business continuity, and that is something very critical for procurement, and that is a big value add. Let me tell you, that's a big value add. If it is communicated well to your stakeholders, that is a big value add. Yeah. And it's a very classical case. If everything goes well, and this is through experience as well, you might have faced that as well. Yeah, if everything goes well, all right, okay, it's normal functioning. If something goes wrong, okay, where is procurement? Where is procurement? Why is the supplier not delivering? Yeah, if something goes wrong, procurement comes immediately into focus, right? So this is where we need to also say that when everything goes normally, that's because of the hard work that procurement has put in. Yeah, so this is where the communication of value add is also very important. Okay, then you have some other blended scorecard functions. So not only procurement, you take in some scorecard across functions, and then we'll see that as an example in the next non-financial poll. Getting feedback from suppliers on your company, and this is something that some companies have started. We have the CSR, we have the CRM typically, where you have the customer relationship management, where a lot of the time your sales guys keep getting feedback from your customers, right? But not so much of that happens on the supplier side. We don't get feedback from our suppliers on how you are performing as a client. What are the things that you could improve on in terms of relationships, in terms of communications, in terms of sharing ideas, in terms of getting ideas and working on it, working together, co-development, co-investment, etc., etc. Getting feedback from the suppliers, is very critical, and then you can pass that on to your internal customers as well, as part of how procurement is adding value and how it can improve based on your customer feedback, as you're the frontier with the suppliers as well. Small actions like that could have a big impact, yeah, eventually. Pushing for integrated product and service solutions. So this is largely, many companies are doing this. Suppliers who are supplying products, or some suppliers who are supplying services, now they are also vertically integrating. So you could have one supplier who is doing an integrative product and services solution, and where you could have larger savings, which can be shown later on. Okay. Early supplier involvement, like you have early procure involvement, you could also involve supplier. This is usually done with your trusted suppliers or key suppliers or critical partner suppliers, kind of, to have an early supplier involvement. And establishing supplier and customer relationship. So many times it could happen that your end customer doesn't even talk to your company, they talk to your supplier directly, right? So, and that is a key value add that procurement can do, to have the right establishment, the right level of SLAs, the right level of KPIs, etc., that you can put in place to make sure that this relationship between the end customer and your supplier is very strong. Yeah, so there are other different avenues to do that. So it's not, we're not talking about savings here, as you can see. Purely the relationship that the supplier and the end customer is having could be strong, and that also gives a big value add in terms of contribution from procurement. Okay, right. So we'll do from these, as you can see, from the downstream examples, also from the upstream. It also starts giving you an idea that we are moving towards some non-financial KPIs. Talk about risk mitigation. Yeah, if you monetize it, it's great. Yeah, it will still be a part of the financial KPI. Blended scorecards that you do, getting feedbacks from your suppliers, etc., etc. All these elements, we are slowly moving towards non-financial contributions. Yeah, where it gives you a good idea on what kind of satisfaction that your customer gets. So when we talk about value, again, as a function of satisfaction versus the cost, for cost we have many KPIs. Yeah, typically in terms of delivery time and all the elements that which save costs. But when we talk about satisfaction, this is where it's challenging to get KPIs, and we start moving towards some non-financial KPIs as well. So I'm going to just put across a question to you in terms of a survey. Let me just open the survey to you. Uh, the second one. Okay. Sorry, just a second. I'm just going to open up the next survey to you. I close this. Silmara, I just need a small help. I just want to move to the second survey. Could you open up the second survey? Okay, hold on. Silmara is just trying to get this sorted out to open up the second survey. Yeah. But meanwhile, do you have any questions so far? Yeah, we can just take a quick round of questions till the time we open up the second survey for non-financial KPIs. Do you have any questions? Yeah, I'll give you a few seconds. Hold on 1 second. Okay, all right, hold on. Okay, so there's one question. I will take that. This is great for most categories. So there's a question which says, I'm just going to publish this, and yeah, you can see the question. This is great for most categories, but what about software? Yeah, even for so for software, you're right. A large part of software KPIs are coming from the let's say the total cost of ownership approach as well. If you're buying software, let's say, if you look, just break down. Correct me if I'm wrong. You'll have a huge cost in the huge cost in some of the license costs, right? And then there are some other elements about upgrading, upgrade of the software, etc., etc. So when we talk about non-financial KPIs, one of the key KPIs I've seen in software providing software availability is the availability. Yeah, there could be the availability because you could have that the software for a particular reason, right? And making sure that the supplier has a KPI or an SLA of, I don't know, 99.9% or whatever availability is, could be key to the business. Even if the supplier, I'll tell you an example. Consider a bank. Okay, sorry, hold on. Silmara has fixed this, but I'll take an example of key value add that you can give as procurement. Consider a bank. Okay, I went to a bank sometime, and I want to deposit a check. Okay, I want to deposit a check, and the lady in opposite the counter, she says to me, unfortunately, we have a system breakdown, and you can't deposit a check. Now imagine millions of people around, hundreds of people or thousands of people for that particular region are trying to deposit a check. The bank is losing money right there. Okay. Now you could have fantastic SLAs and fantastic, penalty clauses or whatever with your software service provider for that banking software, which is not working now. You could have all these elements, but the very notion that you're losing and there's a consequential damage eventually, that is a big value which is lost for the bank. So as procurement, if you have suppliers where you ensure 100% availability on key times, you could have some, let's say, the system breakdown in the middle of, in the midnight, from midnight to 2 o'clock, which is usually done for, maintenance purposes. That's fine. But if you have a breakdown in the middle of, heavy transactions, as procurement, you could make sure that this should never happen. And that's a value add that you can provide as to the business as such. It could be more expensive. The service provider could be more expensive, but the key value add could be absolutely 100% availability. That is again a non-financial KPI that you give. Okay. How do you calculate risk in numbers? Okay, I'm just going to take one last question and then we'll go back to a survey. How do you calculate risk in numbers? That's a good question. So what we have something which we call value at risk. So very classically speaking, in typical risk models, you have the impact that the risk has versus the probability of the risk happening. Yeah. Now, when you talk about probability of risk happening, yeah, it could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%, 10%, 50%, etc. And then you have the impact. And we largely try to monetize this impact. Okay, let's say if a supplier doesn't deliver a product on my production line, and due to which my production line is halted for some time. What is the impact of it? The direct impact is I don't have the product moving. I have to pay the salaries of the people who are there. All these can be monetized to a certain extent to say this is the impact. My impact if a supplier doesn't deliver is 100,000 euros per day. Let's say, let's take an. So this is the impact that you have. Then you have the probability of this happening, maybe 5%, 10%. Okay. And when you talk about mitigation, you could work either on the impact or on the probability. So how do I mitigate that? If I want to increase my safety stock, as an example, I want to increase my safety stock to ensure that this then never happens. So there's a cost associated with it, but this cost can be justified saying that I will not have an impact of 100,000 by investing another 2,000 euros in my security stock or safety stock. Okay, or some kind of a dual sourcing that you could do, that you have cost again associated with it, with a nearby supplier who could provide the product in less than a day, or something like that. So this is where you could monetize largely the impact that it could have. Okay, so we'll come back towards that if you have other questions, but let's go back to the survey. Okay, thank you, Silmara, for fixing this. Okay, so you have the non-financial value add, and you have some questions here. Given now you're seeing the upstream and downstream contributions. Okay, what non-financial KPIs would you consider adding to your procurement performance? Okay, no right or wrong answer again, but what do you think? If you have others, so you can mention others as well. Okay. Okay, so yeah, don't forget to submit. So I can see the votes moving now. That's great. Okay. Okay, a bit more maybe. So the idea here is, that you can see these are typically the non-financial KPIs, again, to make sure that we are working more towards the numerator, yeah, of satisfaction. Okay, 15 seconds more. Okay, 5. Don't forget to submit, okay? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to end voting and share the results with you. So here you can see on the screen now the results. So I can see a large percentage of people are looking at external innovations. Great. Okay, so, and this is again directly where you have procurement involvement, because as a frontier of the external world, you have work. All the innovations that are coming from suppliers are in fact brought in by procurement largely, yeah. Of course, there could be different departments working directly with the suppliers, but as an owner, as let's say, as an owner of the external world, getting suppliers innovation into the company is one of the key aspects of procurement value add, and which is great to see. So you have external innovation as one of the leaders. Then you have some others, which is you have, we talk about supplier availability, the how quickly, or you have the typical response time of the supplier. Is the supplier available all the time for answering anything? And that again depends on the kind of relationships that you establish with your suppliers, which is also linked to the customer of choice. Are you a customer of choice? So if there is an issue, and this is largely we speak even as a part of the risk management, is you have examples like this. You have examples when there are, a few years ago there were some floods in some of the regions in Asia. There was let's say a tsunami that happened in 2004, if I remember well, in Asia, due to which, and then there was a problem in the Japanese automotive industry where there was an earthquake and some of the suppliers were affected. Supplier production plants were affected. What happens in such cases is largely you have the suppliers who have reduced capacity now and reduced production capacity, and they need to choose customers. They need to say, okay, I'm going to satisfy this customer because it's a customer of choice. And if you are a customer of choice, you get that automatic privilege. Yeah. And if procurement is largely one of the key departments which is responsible to make your company as the customer of choice for your supplier. Yeah. So if there's any disruption in the supply, you are sure that your risks are mitigated and you have secure supply. Yeah, as a customer of choice, and that is a key value add. Yeah, that's absolutely a key value add. Okay, so let's go back to what we have seen now as a part of the survey, and some examples of KPIs that you mentioned. So contribution from external suppliers. So access to innovation. This is what you mentioned. External innovation. Yeah, better quality that we talked about. Yeah, as one of the key procurement rights. Quality is absolutely one of them. Improved service offerings. So today, if a supplier is offering something, maybe he adds to his portfolio to add another service, and so on and so forth. Okay. Establishing customer of choice relationship with suppliers. As I said, you also chose the right one. So you have in case of any issue, you become the customer of choice, and this is again a non-financial KPI. There could be other KPIs like social contribution through preferential buying. So many of the companies are doing this now, where you have large companies which are encouraging small and medium scale entrepreneurs, by placing purchase orders with them as a part of encouraging them, which is a social contribution. So obviously you're not putting all eggs in one basket, but this could be this could be a supplier base where you can show this activity as a social contribution from procurement as a part of your CSR, etc. Sorry, through preferential buying. At the same time, it encourages the small and medium scale entrepreneurs and small enterprises to give you, and because they are struggling to get more and more volume, so typically they want to make sure that you get the best treatment and you are the customer of choice in case anything happens. So there could be an easy backup or a fallback option as well. Yeah, and many companies are doing these kind of dual sourcing with some very, very small enterprises, making sure that they get the product and or the service absolutely on time. Then you have another one, which is a part of the revenue enabler that I talked about, sales, supplier buyback. So what happens if you have some elements unsold, some products unsold, some services, number of hours that are not used, etc.? Can the supplier buy back? Yeah. So getting it back to the supplier, it could be also mean that the supplier, when you're selling it back to the supplier, you have the price agreement upfront and so on and so forth. So there's lesser risk for the business, your business, or lesser pressure to utilize and consume all that you have bought from your suppliers. That could be a buyback kind of an agreement done with your supplier in this case. So you can see this is again a part of some of these KPIs or non-financial value add that procurement does big time, usually not tracked, and this is precisely why we want to make sure that all this is communicated well. So you have many ideas now to look at how you can contribute to the value financially, which is largely savings, etc., and through non-financial ideas as well. Okay. Right. So it's just to bring you back to a summary. So we saw this value, the definition of value as function of satisfaction versus the cost. Largely, okay, procurement is having cost reduction objectives, which is clear. Yeah. So you cut the cost, you reduce the denominator, you have higher value add. Yeah. But the other elements that we have seen today in terms of effective value thinking is to enhance satisfaction through various ways, through risk, through functional specs. And the important part is to track these different KPIs that you put in, which are largely non-financial KPIs to enhance satisfaction. So external innovations. So you could have different types of KPIs as to how many external innovations, what is the contribution to it, and then you can link it to the financial KPIs as well eventually. But making sure that you have a higher satisfaction, so the higher numerator, increase in numerator as a function of the costs that are associated with it. Okay, and then ultimately you are contributing to value. Okay, right. So the last part, as a part of let's say a summary, what we have done so far is what is value. So we understand that it's a function of satisfaction versus cost. And satisfaction can come from different areas, as you mentioned in your first survey. It could be best quality, it could be cheapest price still, yeah, but largely risk management as well. Okay, so what are the different components? Where do you contribute? Whenever you make an action plan, how it is contributing to the bottom line? Is it contributing to cost of goods sold? Is it contributing to your operating expenses? Or is it contributing to sales, more sales for your company? Okay, so these are different elements, and whenever you make a contribution, to understand where it is contributing financially to your bottom line. Okay, then understanding upstream and downstream contributions. So you have, as we saw before, large potential savings upstream. When you start moving downstream, the potential savings reduce, but still they are savings anyway, but the potentials of savings starts reducing. Yeah, and some levers like functional specifications, value engineering, adjusting the need to the market is more towards upstream, whereas downstream is classical RFQ, cost reduction, cost breakdown, including /TCO, I would say, negotiation, etc. Okay, tracking of financial and non-financial KPIs, some example that you have seen. And of course, to be a successful organization, largely we move towards communicating this to the stakeholders, so top line and bottom line impact. Whenever you're having a contribution as a revenue enabler, to communicate that very strongly to your stakeholders, and as well as a bottom line impact, obviously, which is largely savings, to communicate them to the stakeholders. Okay, so this is just a flow that you could follow: understanding value, understanding your contribution, how to track those contributions with financial and non-financial KPIs, and communicating these contributions of value add to their stakeholders. Okay, all right. Any questions that you have? We'll open the ground for. Do you have any comments or questions? You can write it down in the chat. Yeah, I'll be following that. If you have any questions, queries, or comments, any comments, or if you want to add something in terms of notes, I can read them out to the others. Okay, give you a minute or so to think, absorb, and then if you have any questions, please do ask them. I hope it was clear to a certain extent. The idea was, is just to generate some ideas. So far, you won't be able to do it with a 45-minute webinar that tomorrow you start working with a fantastic value add. But this is over a period of time. You work on these elements to make sure that whatever value addition or the way value thinking can be done in procurement should be contributing to the business, and then communication to the stakeholders becomes critical. Okay, I'll give. Okay, I have a question. This was part one. Actually, the session one, but then the session two is in the afternoon. It's the same session. It's just to just to separate the geographies, because in the morning we don't have the participation largely from the Americas. This session was done for Europe and Asia largely. Yeah, so there is the part two of the session, but it's exactly similar. Yeah, you are more than welcome to attend, but unless you want a repeat of it. But when you say a part one and part two, it's mainly the same session for the geographies. Okay. Thank you for asking, clarifying that. Okay. I'll give you a minute if you have any questions. No, I don't see much of your questions. Okay, so I don't think that there are any more questions. So we are on time then for 11. So if you have, I mean, before leaving, before you close your webinar, please don't forget to give your feedback. What do you think? If you have any comments, additional comments, please mention. If you think of any specific topic that you would like EIPM to present webinars or in the future, you could do that. And as a reminder, Silmara has reminded me, yes, you will receive this presentation. You'll receive the link to the video recording, the actual presentation with the survey results as well. Okay, so you will get that in your emails soon. Okay. I'll give maybe 20 seconds more. If you have any final comments. No. All right. Okay. So we can close then in that case. Thank you very much for sparing this hour. I hope you can go back with some ideas. That was the purpose. And I wish you the best for your procurement functions. Okay. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.